Hello, Internet. Who am I, you ask? Why, I'm Count VHS, the only Count in Kansas and the only Kansan that counts. As you can see before you, and if you clicked on the title of this video, I'm sure you know, Babylon 5 is getting a reboot. Is it needed? No. Is it wanted? Probably not. Are we getting it? Maybe. Coming in from Deadline, Babylon 5 series reboot from J. Michael Straczynski and works at, where else? The CW. This is going to be great, isn't it? A new version of the Emmy-winning space opera television series Babylon 5 is in the works. We'll scroll down. Written by Straczynski, the reboot revolves around John Sheridan, played by Bruce Boxleitner in the original series, an Earth Force officer with a mysterious background who's assigned to Babylon 5, a 5-mile-long space station in neutral space, a port of call for travelers, smugglers, corporate explorers, and alien diplomats at a time of uneasy peace and the constant threat of war. His arrival triggers a destiny beyond anything he could have imagined, as an exploratory Earth company accidentally triggers a conflict with a civilization a million years ahead of us, putting Sheridan and the rest of the B-5 crew in the line of fire as the last, best hope for the survival of the human race. Because, of course, we can't say mankind. The last, best hope of mankind. But, whatever. I digress. I am actually just generally shocked that if this is going to be Sheridan, that he's still a man. But who knows? CW has time to mess around with it. Perhaps we'll get a black lesbian woman in a wheelchair that identifies as a man playing Sheridan. John Sheridan. Maybe she'll become Jane Sheridan, who knows. So yeah, Straczynski created the original Babylon 5. Look, as a little Count, I grew up. Watching Babylon 5 was one of the first science fiction television series that I really got into. I remember when I was a naughty little Count and I got in trouble, Papa Count and Mama Count would record Babylon 5 before we go to church on Wednesday, and we'd either watch it Wednesday night or we'd watch it sometime on Thursday, and I got in trouble, and, I'm a Count. Count's gotta do Count things. But I missed an episode, and it was devastating. So, because they had to record over an old one. Back in the day, with VHS, before you could just stream any episode you want. Babylon 5 was such a big part of my childhood. Well, childhood for an immortal Count VHS. You can figure out yourself. Anyway, but as a little Count, growing into an older Count, it helped define my ideas and the concept of structural storytelling. No longer were we treated to episodic series. This was revolutionary. It helped define what Deep Space Nine would try to become. In fact, the creators of Deep Space Nine said that they might have found a series Bible of Babylon 5 when they were trying to initially pitch Deep Space Nine, and that might have informed some of their choices in how to develop the latest Star Trek series at the time. Babylon 5 was a wholly original space opera that was very creative and handled many different political, personal conflicts with great care and concern. As I would research Babylon 5 later, I'd learn about how J. Michael Straczynski used to interact with his fans and talk and converse about potential series arcs and where he was intending to go with the series, and and gave little clues here and there in old chat boards. In addition, he used to build in trapdoors just in case something would happen with a character or an actor, such as when the actor that played Sinclair had to leave due to health conditions, or other actors kind of got too big for their role and decided to leave the names out of it. I'm sure you can find it easily if you researched it. But it defined what original science fiction was. You know, Star Wars is probably one of the... Star Wars and Star Trek always had a large foundational part of my understanding of science fiction. Add into that 1960s DC Comics and Marvel Comics with dimension hopping, time travel, and it helped form a well-rounded imagination for young Count VHS. Well, then came along shows like Babylon 5 and Star Trek Next Generation, and it taught diplomacy over conflict, that any problem could be solved by trying to listen and understand one another, and that humanity could find peaceful solutions. In addition, the writing was incredibly intricate and established what series arcs might be, rather than just a season or an episode. This would later inform how I would approach writing media. Babylon 5 is a very formative part of my development as Count VHS. And I don't know that J. Michael Straczynski has what it takes to produce such a level of science fiction these days, especially on the CW. I mean, we all know that shows like The 100 just tend to embrace... How should I say this? No, we'll just say identity politics. You know, they embrace identity politics, and now for the better. How will the CW approach complicated matters such as gender and the Minbari? You know, Dylan transformed into a half-human. Are we going to have a trans actor play all of the Minbari? I mean, of course, with all these new mandates, it doesn't allow science fiction to just be science fiction, you know, as the story dictates. We're going to have to hire several actors and actresses and writers and producers that check boxes. But can they tell good stories? And I'm sorry to say, but I will almost guarantee that it'll also be with a lesser writing staff. Look, hire who you want. My biggest concern is when networks and studio mandates interfere with art. Now, as we'll discuss later, I'm sure J. Michael Straczynski probably won't have a problem with these mandates, and it seems like the CW is trying to give him room enough to operate. But mandates often interfere with the artistic process. Now, will he have to change certain things because of notes from higher-ups? Possibly, but as we've seen, he's very adept at creating trapdoors just in case something changes. And so long as he plans properly for this project, I don't know, as you know, the previous version was kind of his dream project, if that kind of enthusiasm continues. But if so, we've seen that he can plan for those instances, and maybe he can produce the art he wants to without having to worry about studio interference and certain mandates. If so, and that provides the story that he artistically wants to tell, go ahead. The writers of Star Trek Next Generation, or all the Star Treks around that time frame, Babylon 5, not only were they fans of classic science fiction, but they also approached personal issues and political issues in a light of trying to understand it from both sides. It was a time of balance and seeking understanding, seeking peace, as both the crew of the Enterprise and the crew of Babylon 5 both sought. I don't know that you can find that common ground these days. It seems like one side has to be right and one side has to be wrong. And I think this is fascinating because just a few years ago, in 2018, according to The Verge, J. Michael Straczynski tweeted that a revised version, a new reboot of Babylon 5 wouldn't work. They literally told my agent, we have no plans and no intentions of letting anything else be done in terms of television with Babylon 5. And a Kickstarter wouldn't even pay for a fraction of a season. This won't change for years when those execs are, as you can see, are dead and gone. So years later, we get this, and we find that Straczynski replies that, yes, Babylon 5 is in active development as a series for the CW, and we have some serious fans over at the network, and they're eager to see this show happen. And he was writing the pilot. One thing that does seem that at least it's recognized by J. Michael Straczynski, and hopefully the people over at the CW, is that it can't be the same. And for all of those of us that love the original, that it has a special place in our hearts, we can remember that at least for now we do have the original. After the announcement of the CW's Babylon 5, they explained that they couldn't step in the same river twice. The river's changed, and so they have to change. And of course, we can infer what this means from the CW as of to what might have to change. Straczynski explains that it'd be better to go the way of Westworld or Battlestar Galactica, where they take the original elements and put them in a blender with a ton of new, challenging ideas to create something fresh yet familiar. And that they couldn't do an exact continuation because a lot of the older actors are unfortunately passed. That's understandable. And with a universe like Babylon 5, you can't really create a prequel series because a lot of the former Babylon stations were influential in Babylon 5's story. And so the only option is to build it from the ground up, to essentially create a reboot rather than a remake. Straczynski explains that he's going to learn from some of the past mistakes of the original series and hopefully tell the story as he originally intended. Well, we all know that it's not going to be as he originally intended because times are different. And so is Straczynski. So is television, so are people, and on and on. This is a different world, a different time than when Babylon 5 originally aired. And could it be a successful reboot like Battlestar Galactica? In my opinion, the original Battlestar Galactica starred Richard Hatch. For many, Battlestar Galactica is the reboot. Just like Peacock is trying to make a new Battlestar Galactica series based off the reboot of Battlestar Galactica. In my opinion, the original source is the definitive version. And so to me, Babylon 5 will always be the 90s Babylon 5 that, as a little count, I was so disappointed in missing an episode. And no matter what they do with this CW version, at least we have the solace of that it's not a continuation, that it won't hopefully taint the memory of what came before. Such as we've seen with Star Wars and the degradation of Luke Skywalker. And others may argue this, but I loved Twin Peaks, the original television series. And I have a bad taste in my mouth after watching Twin Peaks: The Return. Now, upon watching and reading other reviews, I do have an appreciation for what David Lynch was trying. But I still can't enjoy The Return as much as I enjoyed the original first 2 seasons. And I understand, I'm more of an 80s, 70s fan of that seems to be the era of creativity, even sometimes out towards the 90s. Creativity seems to be dead these days, and as with movements like this to reboot or remake past properties, in my opinion, it only serves to degrade and further push away fans of the originals. Another thing to consider is, what has J. Michael Straczynski done for years? Well, according to my research, he's been on Patreon. You want to guess how much he makes a month on Patreon? $14,000. According to this, the thing about being a writer is that sometimes you spend so much time chasing the jobs you have to do to pay the rent that you don't have the time to tell the stories that you want and need to tell. Yeah. As a writer, and I'm sure any other writer can agree, yeah. Half the time, or 7/8 of the time of being a writer, you are chasing a writing job. And here we have J. Michael Straczynski earning well over $100,000 a year by Patreon. And what has he done? Well, let's look up what J. Michael Straczynski has done. Changeling, directed by Clint Eastwood. I'm pretty sure that you get paid to write a script, especially one directed by Clint Eastwood. I think that studio would have to purchase a script, but what do I know? I'm just a count. He worked for DC Comics for a little bit, and then he created that show, Sense8, that lasted 2 seasons on Netflix. That show, that according to IGN, ended after 2 seasons and got an additional episode to wrap everything up. How did that episode end? Well, according to IGN, this show is responsible for some of the golden age of TV's most beautiful sex scenes. But there's poetry to this last one, a gentleness that communicates love and passion, ending with a sea of bodies of all colors and creeds where you can't really tell who's who, with the final shot that lands on and then fades out from a rainbow strap-on. And this is the J. Michael Straczynski that will be telling the new generation of Babylon 5 on the CW. Is Jakar Orlando going to have a rainbow strap on? That's not something that I want to even picture or imagine or even consider. In a show like Babylon 5, are there going to be CW orgies? I don't want that in a science fiction show about finding peace. Working through our differences to learn how to work alongside each other. And I don't know, maybe there's an audience for that. I'm sure a lot of the people on Twitter will absolutely love this show. And it is what it is. The unfortunate thing is, as mentioned before, we have the original. And I suggest getting physical copies because, as we've seen Disney and many other studios do, they can edit and change things. For those of us that love science fiction of the past, I'm afraid that a lot of that is dead. From Hollywood creatives such as this. A really quick, funny aside. Over at comicbook.com, Netflix's Sense8 Babylon 5 creator in contact with BBC over Doctor Who's showrunner job. That's right. J. Michael Straczynski, known for creating Babylon 5 and co-creating Sense8 with the Wachowskis, and writing comics with such horrible runs as featured in Spider-Man. Yes, with Chris Chibnall and Jodie Whittaker on their ways out, Doctor Who will need a new showrunner. According to J. Michael Straczynski, contact with the BBC had been made. They're going through their own process, which began before his tweet, and that has to run its course. But if those don't pan out and there's a discussion to be had, they'll reach out. Very courteous, so we'll see where that process leads. Well, where did that process lead? Well, they pretty much said that thanks, but no thanks. We've already found our new showrunner in Russell T. Davies. So, back to the Patreon board J. Michael Straczynski went. And then finally, we are handed the Babylon 5 series reboot from CW. Look, I totally understand as an independent artist, you gotta make your way. I'm not complaining about Patreon, and I'm not jealous in the least. I want to make my way. And I think that's what a lot of us who love older science fiction, and Babylon 5 isn't old at all, but those of us that want to see return to form, want to see science fiction deal with issues of finding peace, finding common ground, we're going to have to write that. We're going to have to produce that. We're going to have to make that. Yes, the writers of Babylon 5, the writers of Star Trek The Next Generation, the writers of the original Star Trek, they looked to the past. They looked to science fiction that they grew up with, and that informed their writing. Well, now it's our turn. Let's look to Babylon 5, the Star Trek The Next Generation, and not bemoan new creations, new remakes of those. But let's see where that takes us. As independent artists, let's make the next generation of science fiction. We may be opposed, we may be in the line of fire of media, but we are the best last hope for original science fiction. We can change this. You and I, on a spinning orb, 13,170 billion trillion pounds, all alone in the night. It can be a dangerous place. but together, it is our last best hope for good science fiction revolving around peace. This is the story of rebels and creatives. The year is 2021. The name of the place is Earth. The time is now. God bless.